our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
My goal in this deposition was to be truthful, but not particularly helpful.
Welcome to Unspun, the podcast that makes you better at finding the truth. The way people get news is changing. It used to be that there were many reporters who would research stories and write articles, but now politicians and famous people share information directly with you on social media and the internet. That means you find out things fast, but it's up to you to make sure the information's actually accurate. And newsmakers don't always do their part. The temptation to manipulate information is strong. They bend the truth to deceive so that they can avoid accountability, so that they can advance their agendas. When you recognize these agendas, you can sometimes find out what's real. And we're at a crossroads where anyone can share anything online, so it's important to sharpen your critical thinking skills. Finding that deception before it goes viral is pretty much a survival skill now, and we're going to do it together. Let's get unspun. Hello, truth seekers, and welcome to this week's Unspun. Today, we're diving into a topic that affects how we perceive arguments and make decisions: false choice. And by the end of today, you'll be better equipped to spot this problem and think more critically when someone offers you a choice. Sound good? Let's get unspun. Let's start with a hypothetical example. Imagine you're at a town hall meeting about a new public park, and one speaker says, "We either build this park or we let our community fall into ruin." That's a false choice. They only give you two choices when really there could be a lot more. So what exactly is the false choice problem? It's a logic problem that happens when someone presents two opposing choices as if they are the only possibilities. They ignore any middle ground or alternative answer. Vote for me or accept communism. Vote for me or accept fascism. This can be misleading, and it can actually take away your chance to understand complex issues. Why does it matter? Well, by offering limited choices, it actually makes it harder or even impossible for you to think and decide for yourself. Let's look at another hypothetical. Maybe a politician says, "You either support my education reform plan or you don't care about children." Again, this is a false choice fallacy. It ignores the possibility that someone might care a lot about children's education, but have different ideas on how to improve it. And this limitation keeps you from even considering those different ideas and how they might even be better. So how can you detect this yourself? Well, watch out for extreme language such as always, never, all, or nothing. These words can be red flags indicating that false choice. And when you hear them, stop and think. There may be more than the two choices that they give you. Also, and this is important, it's possible that the real answer involves more than one thing being correct all at the same time. Think about a complicated issue like why student achievement is lagging. The choice you might be given is that schools aren't doing their jobs or parents aren't holding schools accountable. The reason could be, like most reasons are, complicated, and both things could be true. In this week's warm-up, let's practice identifying this problem with two audio clips. First, a little context for the first one. On September 11, 2001, the United States experienced a series of terrorist attacks. 4 planes were hijacked by terrorists, and 2 of these planes crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, causing the buildings to collapse. Another plane hit the Pentagon, the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense, and the 4th plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers tried to overcome the hijackers. Now, in the days after the attacks, President George W. Bush addressed the nation and the world, and he was determined to bring those responsible to justice. On September 20th, he gave a speech to a joint session of the U.S. Congress, and in this speech, he made a famous statement. Have a listen.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
This statement was part of President Bush's effort to build a global coalition to fight terrorism. He wanted other countries to join the United States in acting against the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, which is responsible for the attacks, and the Taliban government in Afghanistan, which was harboring them. Now, Bush's strong words were meant to show that there was no middle ground in the fight against terrorism. Countries had to choose sides. They could either support the fight against terrorism or be seen as supporting the terrorists. But with this statement, Bush presents a false choice fallacy by suggesting only two options. You either support the U.S. or you're against it. And this oversimplifies a complex international relation, and it really ignores the other ways countries might respond to terrorism. Moreover, by framing the situation as a binary choice, it ignores the nuanced positions that different nations must hold for a lot of different kinds of reasons. Now here's a little context for the next clip, the debate over the Iran nuclear deal. This agreement, was signed in 2015 by Iran and several world powers, including the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China. And this agreement attempted to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. And to achieve this, Iran agreed to some restrictions on its nuclear program, which included really reducing the amount of enriched uranium that they had and getting rid of some of the equipment that would have allowed them to continue to create enriched uranium. And in return, the international community agreed to lift economic sanctions that had been hurting Iran's economy. And this deal was seen as a big diplomatic achievement, but it was also really controversial. Supporters believed it was the best way to ensure peace and to prevent nuclear proliferation, but critics argued that it didn't go far enough to stop Iran's nuclear ambitions, and that it might even make the country bolder. Now, during this debate, President Barack Obama made a strong statement. Have a listen.
Final criticism, this is sort of a catch-all that you may hear, is the notion that there's a better deal to be had. We should get a better deal. That's repeated over and over again. There's a bad deal, need a better deal. One that relies on vague promises of toughness. And, more recently, the argument that we can apply a broader and indefinite set of sanctions to squeeze the Iranian regime harder. Those making this argument are either ignorant of Iranian society or they're just not being straight with the American people.
Obama's offering a false choice here, stating that opposing his policy must only be due to ignorance or lying, without acknowledging that there could be real, and legitimate reasons why people understand the issue well, but might still choose to disagree with him. And when you think about it this way, that's a pretty annoying assertion. If you don't support me, you're either bad or stupid. That's basically what he's saying. It's a big election time here in the U.S., so rallies and speeches are in the news big time, and I'd really encourage you to watch out for this. Don't let newsmakers make your choices for you. I need to take a quick break, and when I come back, my guest and I will talk about something really interesting, nonprofit newsrooms, which are fast becoming one of the best sources of news, particularly at the state level. I'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about something really interesting, nonprofit news organizations. You might be wondering, what are these and why are they important? Well, let's dive in and we'll find out. Nonprofit news organizations are media outlets that don't try to make a profit, but instead their main goal is to provide high-quality journalism that is in the public interest. And they get their money to do this from donations, grants from foundations, and sometimes membership fees from their readers. One great example of a nonprofit newsroom is ProPublica. Now, they started in 2007, and they focus on investigative journalism, which means they dig deep into important issues like healthcare or government accountability. They've even won several Pulitzer Prizes for their work, which is kind of like the Oscars for journalism. They get their funding from donations and grants, and this helps them to stay independent and focus on stories that really matter for their audience. Another example is the Texas Tribune, which covers Texas politics and policy, giving people in Texas access to information about the government that's just not in the budget for a lot of news organizations. The Texas Tribune is supported by memberships, but also donations and grants, which helps them stay financially stable. And that stability is a requirement in order to produce top-notch journalism. What makes nonprofit news organizations special is that they can focus on important stories that might not make a lot of money, but are really important for their public to know about. And they can spend time and resources on investigative journalism and in-depth reporting, which are really expensive and time-consuming. Traditional news organizations rely on advertising revenue, and that's been declining a lot. And so with less money coming in, they often have to cut costs, which means fewer resources for investigative reporting. Investigative reporting, it takes a lot of time, it costs a lot of money, and it doesn't always bring in immediate revenue. Sometimes the revenue kind of happens later. And as a result, a lot of traditional newsrooms have had to scale back on these important stories. But it's not that nonprofit news organizations don't face challenges. They do. Financial stability can be tricky because they rely a lot on donations and grants, and those go up and down for different reasons that have nothing to do with the job that the newsroom does. For example, if inflation makes people more cautious with their money. And so it can be hard for them to plan for the future. And they do aim to be independent, but there are sometimes concerns about conflicts of interest if big donors have particular agendas. So to wrap things up, nonprofit news organizations play a crucial role in the media landscape. And they provide high-quality journalism that serves the public interest, even if it doesn't always make money. And that's something that's worth supporting. So enter this week's guest, Ted Struley. Ted is an award-winning journalist who serves as the director of a nonprofit newsroom called Oklahoma Watch, which produces in-depth and investigative pieces for the citizens of Oklahoma. He's a past editor of the Journal Record in Oklahoma City, and he's worked for publications in Texas and California as well. Ted, welcome to Unspun. Yeah. So the first thing I would love to hear is, could you please explain a little bit about kind of the purpose of Oklahoma Watch and what it is that the executive director does?
Sure. Oklahoma Watch was founded back in 2010. We only do statewide investigative journalism. We're a nonprofit. And we make our content available both on our own website and through our newsletters. We also make it available to any other media outlet that wants to use it. So commercial and public television and radio and newspapers around the state and other news websites. The executive director's job, in my case, is twofold at the moment. It's administrative. It's a lot of fundraising. At the moment, I'm also filling the editor's shoes. So I'm kind of working both sides in old school newspaper lingo. At the moment, I'm both the editor and the publisher.
Yeah, and so as we heard in the introduction that I did, you have a lot of experience in journalism, and so I'm sure that is really beneficial to you as you do your job. How many other people work with you there?
We vary a little bit. We max out at about 10. We have room for 6 reporters at the moment, plus 2 other full-time staff, our audience development director and me, which is 8. And then this summer, we have 3 interns working with us.
For the full-time staff, what kind of backgrounds do they have? Is it similar to yours?
They're all experienced journalists. We have one at the moment who we were really his first full-time permanent job out of college, but he was a bit of an exception. His dad is a lifelong journalist. We got him through a program called Report for America, and he's worked out to be a great fit. But the rest of the staff are all seasoned journalists.
So you said that other media outlets can use your reporting if they want to. Is that just like free for them to use, or do they contract with you, or how does that work?
It is. No, it's all free, right? Part of our mission and our philosophy is to make the work available to as much of the public as possible. So no paywalls, no subscriptions, no anything. There are several of those publishing partners that use our work that voluntarily donate to us because they support our mission and support what we're doing and benefit from our work themselves rather directly. And so they choose to make a monthly contribution or an annual contribution, but no requirement to pay for any of our copy that they pick up.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about the kind of topics that you cover? I'm wondering how they're similar to or maybe different from what you might see from local TV or your local newspaper.
They're different. And one of the things that organizations like ours has really tried to fill the gap as traditional print newspapers have gotten smaller in staff size, page count, however you want to measure it. Investigative journalism is far and away the most expensive work any journalism organization does, because instead of paying a reporter an annual salary and they maybe write anywhere from 3 to 7 stories a week, depending on the paper, you may be paying a reporter at an organization like ours who's writing maybe 2 stories a month, right? So if you take the reporter's salary and benefits and all that and divide it by the number of stories they write, the cost per story is just prohibitively high for a lot of media organizations. So back in the salad days when newspapers were flush with money and highly profitable, everybody had an investigative desk that could go do that work, no matter how expensive it was. But that's no longer the case. So organizations like ours that have a different business model, that's all we do. And it helps fill that hole for a lot of those organizations that could not afford to do that on their own. And that same kind of really high-end investigative work still makes it out to the public. So, you won't see any feature stories, gardening tips, opinion columns, sports scores, right? None of the daily spot news kinds of things. We don't do any of that. We do long form investigative work that you won't see coming from the staffs of a lot of daily news organizations.
I'd love to dig into that a little bit. Can you describe for me maybe a recent story that you're especially proud of?
Sure. We've covered extensively in Oklahoma the State Board of Education, especially over the last year or so. One thing that our education reporter, Jennifer Palmer, came across late in 2023 was a request for a proposal from the State Department of Education for a national public relations firm who sole job, as stated in the RFP, was to get the superintendent of public instruction on a minimum number of national television appearances each month and to author for him and place a minimum number of op-eds and to write some speeches. And we raised an eyebrow at that RFP because what in the world does the superintendent of public education in Oklahoma need to hire a PR firm to get on national television for, right? How does that possibly benefit students in Oklahoma? And here we are 8 or 9 months later, we are still pursuing that story. The revelations that have come out of it is that they had hired a company called Vought Strategies, Mary Vought, whose recent ex-husband is very involved with the Heritage Foundation and a lot of super politically conservative causes, as is she. And she was the only bidder on the contract. We found out there were discussions before the bids were submitted of how much they were going to pay her and how much she should bid. As a result of our investigation on that story, we also found out what kind of stories she was pitching because we got copies of the emails she was sending to Fox News and some others. And the stories she was pitching had nothing to do with, say, teacher recruitment or any direct benefit to Oklahoma schools. Direct result of that reporting, the Oklahoma legislature included in the State Board of Ed's budget bill at the end of the session in May, they wrote in language that said none of the money going to the Department of Education could be spent on outside PR firms for personal promotion, or they laid it out very specifically. The governor used his line item veto power to take that language out of that bill before he signed it, and then immediately issued an executive order saying no state agencies could do any sole source contracting for public relations work and so on and so forth. The story goes on because the department's response to that was, well, this wasn't a sole source contract. This doesn't apply to us. So they've just extended that contract. But it's been very controversial, and it's certainly rewarding when a story that you uncovered results in that we think is harmful to Oklahoma residents and taxpayers. When you uncover that and it gets immediate action from the legislature or the governor to try to correct that situation, I really think that's what most of us in the business are doing, is trying to make the world a better place, right? And so that's probably the most recent one that people have really taken notice of.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions on that one then. So first of all, my listeners come from kind of all over the world. So does the superintendent of schools for Oklahoma, is that like an elected position? Is that an appointed position?
That's an elected position. He took office in January 2023.
And does that department within the state government, do they have public affairs officers already?
They do. And so that was one of the things that made it so contentious was you have people on staff to handle communicating with the public and with the media and so forth. And it was very much viewed that this outside contract with a national firm was um, more intended to be personal promotion than uh, work of the Department of Education.
Right. And so those public affairs staff would have already been being paid by the taxpayers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. And then the taxpayers would also be paying for this contract.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure I understand all the different pieces in there. And how much was the contract for?
There isn't an exact amount each month because she's billing $200 per hour, but they estimate $5,000 a month.
Okay. Okay. And so as far as doing the research for a story like that, I know you talked about how investigative reporting is some of the more expensive reporting and it takes a lot more time. How do you get things like the emails to Fox News?
You have a friend in the right place. We had a contact that I can't disclose too specifically, but we had a contact who was in the pipeline of people who received those emails who forwarded them to us.
I guess one of the questions that I would have about the work that you do, it seems like a lot of it would probably be kind of public records focused as well.
We do a lot of public records work. We argue about public records a lot. We sue people over public records a lot. It's kind of a mainstay of our livelihood.
Yeah, okay. And so I'll refer my listeners back to my previous episode that I did about freedom of information laws. And that would be great. Okay, so here's my next question. Who pays for all of this? I know that you said that you do get some kind of donations from maybe news partners, but generally, since fundraising is your job, who pays for all of this reporting?
Well, in our case, about 83 to 85% of our funding comes from institutional donors, large foundations that make very generous grants that really keep us afloat. Most of the balance comes from individual donors. We have people that give us $5 a month. We have people that write a check for $10,000 or $25,000 once a year, and everywhere in between. But those individual donors make up about almost 15% of our budget, and then institutional donors make up the rest. We occasionally get a little bit of corporate sponsorship, but that's really a very small fraction at the moment.
And I know that sometimes there's questions about the way that news gets paid for and if that affects the content of the news that you have at all. So what kind of things do you have in place to have like editorial independence?
Fortunately, one of the good things about donors is that with small individual donors, there's no thought even that their $5 a month contribution is going to dictate what we cover, right? And they just show appreciation for what we do. Large donors know the rules, right? And it's no different really than 150 years of commercial newspapering wasn't any different. You had very large advertisers who were paying the bills for you, and they knew and you knew that there was that brick wall between the revenue side and the journalism side, and the two don't really cross. The only exception to that, I'd say, in nonprofits is that we occasionally have a specific project we want to do, and someone has a grant available that happens to be a good fit for that particular project, right? And so, somebody's got some money and they're specifically interested in something to do with criminal justice or have a specific idea, and we go, hey, we've got a criminal justice project we're dying to do. Here's the project. Here's what we have in mind. Here's what we want to do. Will you fund that project? And so it's not them coming up with a story idea and saying, we want you to go do this story. We'll give you the money for it. It's us going to them saying, we've got a project in mind that aligns with this grant that you've advertised. We'd like to apply for it.
So if you could double your funding tomorrow, what would you do that you're not doing right now?
I would hire more reporters. And our beat structure at the moment, we have very broad, vague terms compared to a traditional daily newspaper. So we have a beat we call vulnerable populations, for example, that covers everything from mental health to domestic violence to poverty to, in some cases, women's issues. We have a race and equity beat, a criminal justice beat, an education beat, a state government beat. And so those are very broad, right? What we don't have that we would like to have, we'd like to have an energy and environment beat. We don't have the capacity right now to really do big environmental investigations. And in Oklahoma, the energy business is so predominant that there's a great deal of crossover between the energy industry and the environment. We think that's an area of great opportunity for us. So that's one place we would put the money. I would add a couple staff in other parts of the state. Right now, everybody's in an office in Oklahoma City because that's where the state capital and all the state agencies are. So as a matter of convenience, that's practical for us. But it would be great to have people there in person in Tulsa or some rural parts of the state, because just physically being there leads to stories that you don't get by phone or by email. So even when you can drive up there and talk to them, it's not the same as living there and being part of the community. So if I had the fantasy land, double the budget, I'd add some staff. I would try to spread them around the state a little bit, and we would add a couple of beats that we don't have now.
And where do you get your story ideas from?
Well, sometimes they just throw them at us. Sometimes state government's doing things that you just can't ignore, and that makes it easy. The vast majority of the really good stories we do, the impetus for the story comes from somebody picking up the phone and giving us a tip, right? Where somebody says, "Hey, did you hear about this?" Or, are you guys looking into that? Or, have you ever considered this? Some of those stories we never pursue, and some of them we do. I tell people all the time that we can't possibly write about everything we know about. Right? We just can't possibly do it. On the other hand, if we don't know about it, there's no way we can write about it. And so we constantly encourage readers and sources and anybody we come across that if they see something that they think maybe we should investigate, or something that might be of interest to our audience, to please let us know about it and at least give us the option to follow up on it, because if they don't tell us, we're never even going to know it's out there.
There's been a lot of headlines lately about reductions in staff, reductions in size in a lot of mainstream news outlets. Say the future's not looking real great there. What's the future looking like for nonprofit news?
The Institute for Nonprofit News, which is sort of our national trade association, if you will, I think in 2010 or 2012, or maybe even more recent than that, had 40 members. This year's convention, just a month or so ago out in San Diego, we were at 450 members. So exponential growth in organizations like ours that at 14 years old, we're one of the senior citizens in the business now, right? But really just exponential growth, and not all doing investigative work. Some are doing community journalism. Some are, sort of doing the daily newspaper kind of spot news journalism. Some are doing sport, but quite a few of them are a similar model to ours, where the emphasis is really on that investigative work that was the first thing to disappear as traditional media started to downsize.
Okay, fantastic. Is there anything I should have asked you and I didn't?
There are a couple of curious things going on in the industry that might be worth noting as it grows and figures itself out, right, as we go along. One is that that's vastly different from traditional media is the spirit of collaboration. We share all our stuff. They share with us. We tell each other what we're working on. We all trust each other now. And this was a highly competitive dog-eat-dog business for certainly all of my lifetime, right? If you saw a reporter from another news outlet, there was a whole game you played of trying to get them to tell you what they knew without you telling them anything that you knew. And it doesn't work that way anymore. And I think 7 or 8 years ago, I was having a conversation with Kelly Fry, who was the executive editor of The Oklahoman at the time. Her comment was, the days of dog-eat-dog journalism are over. If we don't all help each other, none of us are going to survive. And I really think the industry has taken that philosophy to heart. We're in a building with a traditional metropolitan daily newspaper and the largest commercial television station in the state. And we're separated by glass walls, right? We talk to each other in the hallways every day and on the elevator. That never would have happened 20 or 30 years ago, right? Nobody would have dreamed of that kind of an environment. So I think ultimately in that scenario, the winner is the public, because we share ideas, we work together, we get more done more efficiently, and ultimately the public wins. The idea that journalism dead should go away, right? We have more readers than ever. The New York Times at last count had 10.36 million paid subscribers. Whoever dreamed of having 10 million paid subscribers, right? That's crazy. And 95% of those are digital subscriptions. Only 5% get an ink on paper product delivered. So lots of audience out there. Journalism isn't dead by any means. We're just having to change the business model.
Awesome. That sounds like a great note to wrap up on. So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate you being here on Unspun. Thanks for getting Unspun with me this week. Unspun is a production of me, Amanda Sturgill, and is a proud member of the MSW Media family of podcasts. Send me your thoughts and ideas about trickery in the news on Gmail at TheUnspunPodcast@gmail.com. I even write back. And find this episode's show notes and more information at TheUnspunPodcast.substack.com. Want to learn more and get smarter? Check out my book, Detecting Deception: Tools to Fight Fake News, which is available on Amazon or your favorite online bookseller. And until next time, stay sharp, everyone.